The Ruthless Alpha's Mark, written by Short Story Queen. Chapter 1. Chains in the Snow. The cold bit deeper than the chains did. Elia stepped barefoot through the churned, blood-flecked snow, her wrists bound in iron, her breath silvering the air like smoke. Around her, men shouted, wolves howled, and torches burned. The auction square, once a village center, now swallowed by the war and ice, reeked of wet fur, old blood, and sweat under leather. She barely noticed. The scent of wolves was always in her nose now. It had been for weeks. The platform loomed ahead, a wooden block with blackened stains, raised just enough for the crowd to see what they'd bought. Elia didn't look at it. Her eyes stayed forward, unfocused, blank as frost. Someone in the crowd tossed a handful of snow at her legs. Another man laughed. She's small, skin and bones. Doesn't even flinch. She-wolf, is she? Doesn't smell like one. Elia kept walking. The auctioneer barked behind her. Mute, untouched, virgin bloodline, never shifted, last known female of her village, useful for breeding or killing. The crowd jeered, unimpressed. A few alphas glanced over, already bored. There were stronger concubines, flashier ones, some with wolves prowling just beneath their skin. This girl looked like a shadow, dressed in rags. No scent, no voice, nothing to mark her but the silver collar locked around her throat. And yet, she stood straight as a blade. The soldier guiding her gave her a shove, sending her stumbling up the wooden steps. She caught herself silently. Didn't fall. The auctioneer stepped forward, grinning like a butcher. We'll start the bidding at 20 silver. Cheap for a she-wolf, even a broken one. Silence. A scoff. Someone spat. She's not worth half that. Probably barren. Why's she mute? She's empty. The war took her wolf. Elia's fingers curled slightly around the edge of the block. She didn't look at them. Didn't need to. Their words slid off her skin like sleet. They'd said worse. The auctioneer cleared his throat, louder this time. 15 silver. 10. 7. Still nothing. Then a voice, low, cold, iron-wrapped, cut through the crowd like a blade through frost. 5. Everything stopped. Heads turned. Even the auctioneer hesitated. Cain Thorn, the alpha of Blackfang, northern warlord, slaughterer of the Crimson Rebellion. He stood in the back, shadowed by 2 massive guards, both wearing the black sigil of his mountain fortress. He wasn't in armor, just a thick black coat, with fur at the collar, a blade at his hip, and eyes the color of storm-wet stone. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The auctioneer blinked, then snapped his fingers. Sold. It was over just like that. Chains clinked. The guards came forward. No one dared protest, not even the ones who'd laughed. They parted as Cain stepped forward, boots crunching through the snow, his coat rippling with each movement. He didn't look at Elia, not once, just turned and walked away. The guards jerked her down from the platform and dragged her behind him. She didn't resist. The transport wagon was colder than the air outside. Iron bars lined the windows. Straw and piss soaked the floor. Elia sat curled in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, listening to the rhythm of the wheels. They rolled endlessly over frozen stone and packed snow, deeper into the north. No one spoke. Hours passed. Snow began to fall, slow at first, then heavier. Thick flakes clung to the bars and melted against her skin. Her feet had long gone numb. The chains around her wrists had left her skin raw. She counted breaths to pass the time. When she reached 300, She heard the wagon shift. One of the guards spoke, not to her. Elia. The name was said without meaning, like a fact. Daughter of no one, claimed by Cain Thorne. There was no ceremony, no ritual, just a name traded for silence. She doesn't even have a wolf. Another pause, then a grunt. She has something. The wagon stopped at dusk. They were in the mountains now. The air was thinner, the wind sharper. Elia stepped out into blinding white, the snow reflecting what little light the moon offered. Before her rose a fortress carved into the cliff face, black stone, jagged towers, no banners, no warmth. The gates yawned open, wide enough for giants. Blackfang, the last place most she-wolves ever saw. The guards led her forward, through the gates, across the stone courtyard where no flowers grew, where the only color came from blood frozen into cracks between the stones. They passed others, soldiers, concubines, servants, but none spoke. Some watched her with curiosity, others with hunger, a few with pity. Cain stood at the top of the steps, still in black, still silent. A scar ran from his temple to jaw, cutting through stubble. His eyes swept over her, once, without expression, and he turned away. "Put her with the rest," he said. She was led inside. Elia didn't know how far they walked. Corridors twisted like veins, narrow and dim. Doors opened and closed. Voices echoed. Somewhere, a wolf howled, not with rage, but longing. The sound caught in her bones. Eventually, the guards stopped before a thick wooden door. They shoved it open. Inside, a narrow room, stone floor, thin mattress, wash basin. Nothing else. The chains were removed. The door slammed shut. Elia stood still in the dark. She listened. The wind whispered through the slit window. Water dripped from the roof. Her breath came slow, steady. She knelt in the center of the floor, placing her palm flat against the stone. It was warm. The fortress lived. And above her, unseen, she felt them. The wolves, watching, judging, waiting. She closed her eyes. Let them watch. She would not fall here. Chapter 2. The Frozen Palace. The silence in the East Wing wasn't peaceful. It was surgical. Every footstep echoed too sharply. Every flicker of torchlight felt deliberate, like eyes blinking from within the stone. The walls were cut from deep obsidian, veined with silver, that looked like the frozen roots of some long-dead tree. Heat came only from narrow braziers tucked into the corners, and even that heat didn't reach far. The fortress was colder on the inside than the storm howling beyond its gates. Elia followed the soldier's lead, her bare feet whispering across the stone. No chains now, but the collar remained. A loop of iron fastened at her throat with no runes, no decoration, just the weight of ownership. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. It burned with absence, not fire. The absence of choice, of voice, of freedom. She wore it as she'd worn everything, quietly. They passed others in the corridors, some in armor, some half-dressed in silk. Not one met her eyes. The palace women moved like predators, not a hint of softness in their curves or laughter in their eyes. Their scents filled the air, honeysuckle, musk, lilac, and ash, all painted over something raw and feral beneath. She could feel it brushing against her skin, that primal awareness. Wolves, all of them, close to the surface, watching, measuring, sniffing for weakness. She gave them nothing. At the end of a long hall, A carved archway opened into a bathing chamber. The scent of herbs, salt, and something sweet, peaches maybe, curled in the air. Steam clung to the mirrors. The soldier gestured, then turned his back. Two women waited beside the large black stone tub. One older, hair wrapped in cloth. One younger, biting at a thread in her sleeve. Neither spoke. The older one tilted her head at Elijah. "Undress." Elijah didn't move. The woman's lips barely parted. "You'll enter the concubine tier clean, or not at all. Choose." Still, Elijah hesitated. Not from modesty, she had none left, but from instinct. This was not a bath. It was a ceremony, a cleansing, a test. She dropped the rags to the floor, stepped forward, and climbed into the water. It wasn't warm, not truly. The surface heat vanished after the first layer of skin. Beneath it, cold lurked. Not enough to burn, but enough to bite. They scrubbed her without speaking. Hard brushes over knees, elbows, throat. Salts rubbed across her scalp until her eyes watered. She kept her hands folded in her lap and her jaw clenched, even when they combed out the tangles with dull, ripping teeth. A servant whispered a prayer under her breath, something about the moonborn, and the older woman snapped at her to hush. They dressed her in pale gray, simple cotton, clean, no shoes, no jewelry, no fur to protect her from the halls. Then they opened a door at the far end. The concubine wing. Heat blasted her, perfumed and heavy, thick with laughter and silk rustling over stone. Candles dripped from golden sconces, furs lined the walls. She stepped into a different world, one meant to trick the mind into forgetting where it was. Dozens of them. Women lounging on couches, feeding one another sugared fruit, sharpening knives, stretching like cats. No guards here, no fear. These were not prisoners. They were competitors, and Elijah was new meat. The first to approach was red-haired, tall, beautiful, smug enough to wear it like perfume. She circled Elijah once, eyes raking over her from throat to ankle. "You're the one from the auction," the woman said. Her voice was velvet, but it cut like wire. The mute. Elijah didn't blink. "Do you have a name?" Silence. The redhead clicked her tongue. "Pretty, fragile, probably not even wolf-born. You won't last long." She smiled like it was a kindness, then leaned in, voice soft against Elijah's cheek. "If you're lucky, he'll kill you before one of us does." Then she walked away. A few others followed, less mocking, more curious. A girl with a lisp asked if she could braid Elijah's hair. Another warned her not to touch the west wing unless summoned. No one offered her a seat. Someone shoved a blanket into her arms and nodded toward the smallest room off the main hall. "That one's empty." It was barely a room, a storage space with a mattress. No window, no fire. Elijah sat in the dark, blanket curled around her, listening to the floorboards creak as the others moved through the night. Laughter rose and fell. Somewhere above, footsteps passed on the stone stairs, slow, heavy, and precise. Him. She didn't need to see him to feel it. Cane Thorne's presence wasn't warmth, it was weight. It pressed against her chest, made the air harder to pull in. He hadn't looked at her since the auction, hadn't spoken her name, but he had watched. She remembered the moment, through the wagon bars, how his eyes had found her and lingered, not with hunger, not even suspicion, with intent. Elijah tucked her legs beneath her and ran a finger along the scar across her palm. It had long since healed, but she traced it anyway, remembering the blade, the night she'd made it, the oath she'd whispered into the snow. They had taken her voice, her wolf, her freedom, but not her will. The palace would not break her, not the concubines, not the cold, not even the alpha. She pressed her fingers to the stone floor and listened. No howl answered, not yet. But something stirred beneath the silence. Chapter 3. A Wolf Without a Name. The concubine wing never truly slept. Even in the deepest hours of night, silk whispered against silk, laughter simmered in corners, and the scent of perfume thickened the air like fog in a hot spring. Elijah learned quickly that silence was not the absence of sound in this place. It was a waiting. Every quiet moment was pregnant with schemes. She didn't speak, but that didn't mean she was quiet. She moved through the wing like a ghost, slow and observant. She watched the way Vera's red hair was always pinned perfectly, even in sleep. Not a strand dared fall out of place. The others hovered around her like lesser moons to a planet with gravity. No one disobeyed her. No one corrected her. Even the guards looked elsewhere when she walked by. Vera was not the alpha's favorite. No one was. Cain didn't visit the wing. Not yet. But everyone acted like he might. Every hour, every night. And Vera wore that possibility like a crown. Elijah kept her head down. Not low in submission, just low enough to hide the thoughts moving behind her eyes. She scrubbed floors in the outer halls, cleaned plates from the fireside tables, listened more than she moved. Not once did she speak, though a few of the women tried to trick her into sound. One dropped hot wax onto her ankle, pretending it was an accident. Another offered her a caramel and claimed it was poisoned. Elijah had taken it, bit off the corner, and let it melt slow against her tongue. Bitter molasses. Not poisoned. The girl hadn't tried again. It was a game, all of it. Who would rise? Who would be marked? Who would be discarded? There were whispers that the last concubine to earn the alpha's attention had vanished the next night, dragged from her bed by guards who wouldn't say why. Some said she'd bit him without permission. Others claimed she had no wolf and lied. Elijah said nothing. She watched. She waited. There was one place in the fortress where quiet felt real. A narrow corridor near the servants' quarters led to a half-frozen balcony, wide enough for 3 feet to stand side by side. No one used it. No torches burned there. Just stone and sky and endless, untouched snow. She stood there sometimes with her arms folded beneath the cloak she'd stolen from a hook, thin, patchy fur. The wind cut through it easily, but she didn't mind the sting. The cold reminded her that she was still alive. Below the balcony, the cliff dropped into a black ravine so deep no torchlight reached the bottom. Somewhere beyond it, wolves roamed. Not pack wolves, not marked. Rogues, wild and driven mad by solitude. Their howls carried through the wind some nights, tangled with grief or hunger or both. She listened to them. She envied them sometimes. A rogue at least could run. Elijah closed her eyes and tilted her face into the wind, letting the snow kiss her cheeks. Somewhere deep in her chest, something stirred. Not a sound, not a word, just a shift in her bones, like something turning over in sleep. She didn't know what woke her that night. Perhaps it was the heat. She'd grown used to the cold stone, the paper-thin blankets, the chill that never left her toes. But she woke with sweat on her back and a pounding in her skull like thunder behind her eyes. Her breath came faster. The room felt smaller than it had before. Too narrow, too loud. Something was wrong. She sat up slowly, heart thudding against her ribs. The shadows on the wall didn't move, but they felt closer. The scent of the other women's perfume was sharp, nearly acidic. Her fingers ached, her skin crawled, her eyes burned. She pressed her hand flat to the stone floor to steady herself. It pulsed beneath her palm, alive. Again. She rose to her feet and crossed the room barefoot, half stumbling, shoulders braced against the stone walls. The air shifted as she passed through it, thicker somehow, like walking through smoke. Outside her room, the hallway was empty. The torches flickered low. Everything was as it had always been, and yet utterly changed. She passed the mirror near the far end of the corridor. Stopped, turned. Her reflection stared back. Same pale skin, same narrow shoulders, same collar, but her eyes, no longer gray, not entirely. There was something darker blooming at the edges, like ink bleeding through frost. She leaned in, breath fogging the glass. The pupils were wider than they should have been. The silence inside her stretched, then broke, not with words, not with a voice, but with presence. Something inside her blinked. A thought that wasn't hers whispered from beneath the skin, old and cold and clear. You are not alone. She jerked back, struck the wall behind her, heart hammering, breath tangled in her throat. The voice vanished, but the feeling didn't. She stood there for a long time, trembling, not from fear, but recognition. The thing that had slept inside her was waking, and it wasn't tame. Chapter 4. The Bond. The blood moon rose as the sun died over the peaks. Its color bled through the narrow window slits like a wound in the sky, casting streaks of red across the black stone floors. Even in a palace built to contain wolves, something about its arrival made the walls seem to shift, as though they were holding their breath. The wind outside howled low, and the guards grew tense. Doors were locked, braziers lit, orders whispered. Inside the concubine wing, the change was immediate. The air grew thicker. The women moved slower, more deliberately. Their wolves pushed forward just beneath their skin, hungrier than usual. Eyes gleamed brighter. Claws grew sharper. The atmosphere cracked with tension that smelled of sweat and perfume and something primal. Elia felt it too. It began as a dull vibration in her chest, then deeper, curling down her spine like a creeping vine. Not painful, but persistent. A soft burn that pulsed behind her ribs and made her skin feel too tight. Every footstep echoed louder. Every scent stabbed deeper. Her vision swam in flickers of color that didn't belong. Strange lights, shadows that moved when nothing else did. She dressed slowly, guided by instinct rather than command. Gray again, but cleaner, softer. No jewelry, no paint, no weapons. She didn't need them. When the bell rang, she followed the others into the grand hall. It was vast, columns carved from volcanic stone, draped in dark crimson silk, with torchlight flickering off the frost-covered windows. At the far end, a long table carved from a single slab of dark oak ran the length of the room, lined with chairs no one dared sit in unless summoned. Cain was already there. He stood with one hand resting on the back of the central chair, facing away from them. He didn't speak, didn't turn. His presence filled the space like a thundercloud, heavy with coming violence. Beside him, Jorek stood stone-faced, arms crossed, gaze sweeping the room like a hawk, circling prey. Vera moved first. She sauntered past the others with practiced ease, the thin red silk of her gown clinging to her hips, as if begging to be torn. She approached the Alpha with a smile that could cut bone and dropped to one knee beside him, offering him a goblet without being asked. He didn't take it. Elia stayed at the back. She didn't kneel, didn't approach. She wasn't sure why. The burn in her chest had deepened, become a pressure now, something hot and sharp that felt like it was trying to carve its way out. Her hands trembled, so she curled them into fists. Then his head turned, just slightly, enough for his eyes to find hers across the hall. Everything stopped. Elia's breath caught mid-inhale, her vision narrowing, not from panic, but clarity. She couldn't hear the other women anymore, couldn't feel the floor beneath her feet. The only thing she was aware of was the line between them. Thin, invisible, vibrating with energy that hadn't existed a second before. His eyes, dark, storm-torn, widened. She felt it snap. Not gently. The bond. It lashed into her like a lightning strike, not a ribbon of warmth, but a violent tether pulling at her soul. Her knees buckled and her throat clenched, though no sound escaped. Her heartbeat thrashed like a trapped thing, but the silence inside her mind had shattered. She was no longer alone. The presence that had stirred in Chapter 3 now roared forward, full, ancient, alive. Era. Her wolf didn't arrive with grace. She arrived with rage. Her thoughts sliced through Elia's mind like broken glass, unfamiliar and overwhelming. Finally. The voice was cold, clear, hungry. Do not bow. He is not your master. Elia's legs locked. Cain moved. Not toward her, not toward anyone. Just a half step back from the table, one hand lifting as if to steady himself against something invisible. Jorek took a sharp breath, barely audible. Vera turned, eyes narrowing, lips parting in disbelief. Elia hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, and yet something had changed. Everything had changed. Her skin burned, her fingertips ached, and her vision pulsed at the edges with red light, as if the moon's glow had infected her blood. The bond was real, and Cain knew it. He looked at her now, truly looked, not with suspicion, with fury, like he'd been tricked, cursed, played by the gods he didn't believe in. Elia didn't flinch. She watched him the way prey might watch a predator it no longer feared. Not because the predator had grown soft, but because the prey had grown teeth. Cain turned sharply and left the hall. No words, no orders, no explanation. Vera watched him go, then turned her gaze to Elia. It was not hate in her eyes. It was fear. The women didn't approach her that night. No one did. She walked the halls alone, unguarded, the blood moonlight casting her shadow long across the walls. Her limbs still trembled, and Era's presence curled beneath her skin like a second breath, not fully in control, not yet. You are mine, the wolf whispered again, but not his. Elia stood before the mirror in her chamber, and for the first time didn't see herself. She saw something more, and the bond still pulled, not softly, not sweetly, but like a chain wrapped in flame, and she knew Cain felt it too. Wherever he was in the palace, whatever war he was fighting within himself, he felt her now, and hated it. Chapter 5. Denial and Lockdown. The snow hadn't stopped since the moon turned red. It clung to the windows in thick, icy sheets, and when the wind howled, the fortress groaned beneath the weight of it. Servants moved quickly. Guards patrolled with sharper eyes. Something in the palace had shifted, and no one could pretend otherwise. The blood moon had awakened more than wolves. It had unsettled the alpha. Elia wasn't summoned. She was taken. 2 guards appeared outside her chamber before dawn. They said nothing, just gestured. She didn't resist. Her skin still hummed from the night before, and Era prowled beneath the surface, restless, wordless, watching through her eyes with a hunter's calm. The corridors they walked weren't familiar. They twisted deeper into the heart of the mountain, past locked gates and sealed staircases. The air changed, less scented, more sterile. The walls gleamed with frost. They brought her to a door taller than any she'd seen before. Double blackwood, bound in silver. 1 guard opened it. The other gestured again. Elia stepped inside. It wasn't a cell. It wasn't the concubine wing either. The chamber was beautiful. A fire burned in the stone hearth. Heavy furs were piled on a bed larger than anything she'd ever seen. Tall windows lined the walls, glass etched with runes that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Shelves stacked with books. A table set for 1, a claw-footed tub. Candles flickered, filling the air with soft smoke and lavender. The door shut behind her, with a low thud of finality. Elia turned slowly, eyes sweeping the space. No locks from the inside, no key on her. No exits but the one she'd entered through. A cage, then, but with velvet walls. She approached the window. Her breath fogged the glass. From here she could see the edge of the cliff, the ravine she'd once stood above, a strip of snow-lined forest in the distance. No sounds of the other women, no sense of perfume or fur. Just wind, ice, solitude. Era stirred, her voice dry as frost. He hides you like treasure or poison. She stepped back from the window just as the door opened again. Cain entered. He didn't wear his coat, only a black tunic that hugged his frame, sleeves rolled to the elbows. His jaw was dark with stubble, and snow still clung to his boots. He closed the door behind him and didn't speak. For a moment, he only stared at her. Not with the emptiness from before, not with indifference. There was something behind his gaze now, fractured, furious, hungry. It twisted his face into something that didn't quite look like a man. Then he crossed the room. Elia didn't step back. She didn't move at all. He stopped just in front of her, inches away, and her body responded without permission. Breath hitched, skin tingled. The bond pulsed between them like a second heartbeat, louder than the first. He reached out and gripped her jaw. Not gently, but not cruelly either. Just hard enough to make her meet his eyes. "You think you've won something?" he said, voice low, rough. "That this bond means anything?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. He leaned closer, his breath hot against her mouth. "It doesn't." The words were fire, but they burned him, not her. "I don't want a mate," he growled. "I didn't ask for one, and I sure as hell don't want you." Still, she said nothing. Her gaze never wavered, and that, more than anything, seemed to break something in him. He released her and turned away, pacing toward the hearth, like the walls were closing in on him. One hand raked through his hair, the other clenched at his side. "I buried my first mate," he said, more to the flames than to her. "She betrayed me, tried to kill my wolf. You think I'll ever make that mistake again?" He turned back, slower this time, expression cold, distant. "Whatever bond the blood moon gave us, I reject it." The air tightened around her like an invisible fist. Era bristled. "He rejects you," the wolf hissed. "Let him try. The bond does not care for his pride." Elia moved toward the fire, not toward him, and sat on the fur-lined bench without invitation. She crossed her legs and stared into the flames. The heat licked at her ankles. Her body felt too full, as if something larger than her skin had begun to press outward. She didn't need his acceptance, but she felt his denial. It cut not like rejection, but like war declared. He watched her for a long time. She could feel it, his eyes tracing the curve of her throat, the collar still locked there, the steady rhythm of her breath. Her silence unnerved him. She knew that now. He wanted her to speak, to cry, to beg, but she didn't give him that. Eventually, he stepped toward the door. "I'll have food brought," he said. "You'll remain here. No one enters without my order." Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't tremble, but the wolf inside her lifted its head. "So this is what it means to be caged by your mate." Cain paused before he left. He didn't look back, but his final words slipped into the space like smoke. "Don't try to leave, Elijah. You won't like what happens if you do." Then he was gone, and the door locked behind him. She didn't touch the food. She paced instead, counted the stones in the wall, the panes in the glass. She bathed and scrubbed her skin raw, trying to wash away the imprint of his hand on her jaw. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. She didn't want it to feel like anything. But it did. When night fell again, and the moon hung low in the sky like a blade held at the throat of the world, Elijah stood in the center of the room, arms bare, hair loose around her shoulders. She looked at the window, the snow, the dark beyond, and she whispered inside her mind, "You're awake now. What do you want?" The answer came with teeth: to run, to bite, to mark. She touched the base of her throat, where the bond pulsed like a second pulse. Her mark hadn't appeared yet, not fully, but it waited. So did he. And though the door remained locked and the walls stood thick and high, Elijah didn't feel small. She felt dangerous. The alpha had chosen to cage her. And now, like any wolf denied its mate, she would learn how to make him regret it. Chapter 6. The Other Wolves. Snow fell for 3 days without pause. It blanketed the fortress in a silence even thicker than usual, muffling the usual footsteps and clatter of weapons in the corridors. From her window in the east wing, Elijah could see little beyond white and shadow, branches buried under weight, paths erased. The world beyond the palace had gone still, but inside, tension thickened like a storm waiting to snap. The other concubines didn't speak of her anymore. They whispered instead, behind gloved hands, behind closed doors. Something about the silence of the east wing made them nervous. No one was invited inside. No one had seen the alpha since the blood moon. And Elijah, who'd once been mocked as useless, now existed in a cloud of fear and fascination. The rumors grew on their own, that she had clawed Cain's face, that she'd seduced him in silence, that she'd poisoned the bond and would bring down the pack if not removed. None of them were true, but none of them were fully false either. The truth had stopped mattering. It was Vera who acted first. She played her part perfectly, smiling too brightly when Elijah passed through the main wing under guard, complimenting her skin, asking how she slept. But her scent always told the truth. Sweet at the surface, rotted just beneath. The attack came 2 days after the snowfall stopped. The moment had been arranged with careful calculation. Elijah had been sent to the snow garden, an enclosed courtyard blanketed in ice and lined with dead roses frozen to the stems. It was meant as a gesture. Air, they'd said, freedom to stretch your legs. A break from confinement. A test. Jorek accompanied her, as always, walking 2 paces behind, face unreadable beneath his cloak. The other guards kept their distance. She stepped into the garden and inhaled the silence. It was cold, sharp, lovely in its emptiness. The wind carried no scents. Her boots crunched softly over the frost-covered path. The only sound was the whisper of snow brushing against stone. Then something shifted. Too fast, too close. The first strike came from her left. Not claws, not a wolf, a blade. She turned just in time, catching the glint of metal before it sliced down. Her shoulder twisted beneath it, pain flashing hot through her arm. She didn't scream. She dropped low, rolled across the stone, and came up in a crouch, blood trailing down her sleeve. Another woman, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, one of Vera's silent shadows, charged again, face twisted in focus. Elia didn't shift. She didn't call Era forward. Instead, she moved, fast, quiet, deliberate. She sidestepped the next blow and brought her elbow up beneath the attacker's chin. Bone cracked. The woman stumbled. Elia swept her legs out and sent her crashing to the snow, breath knocked from her lungs. Another figure appeared behind her. Elia ducked, spun, and rammed her shoulder into the woman's chest. Smaller, faster, claws half-formed. She dodged the swipe, grabbed the girl's wrist, and twisted until something snapped. Jorek had drawn his sword but hadn't stepped forward. Not once. She saw him watching, studying, testing. And she understood then. This had been sanctioned. Not by Cain, maybe, but tolerated, as if to ask, what will the mute do? She stood over the first woman, who groaned and spat blood into the snow. Her heart pounded, her shoulder burned. The cut was deep, but clean. Era stirred, a growl curling low in her mind. End them. But Elia didn't move. She stepped back instead, turned her back on them, and walked to the edge of the garden without looking behind her. It was enough. The message had been sent. She didn't need to bare fangs to show she wasn't prey. Jorek said nothing on the walk back to the east wing, but when she reached the door, he paused. She was told not to go that far, he said quietly. She won't try again. Not like that. Elia glanced at him, then touched the torn edge of her sleeve. The blood had dried in the cold. She didn't nod, didn't answer. He stepped aside and opened the door. That night she didn't sleep. She sat by the fire, shoulder wrapped in a strip of cloth she'd torn from the bedsheets, watching the flames flicker. Era was restless beneath her skin, pushing harder now, trying to rise. The bond still pulsed between her and Cain, like a bruise that refused to fade. She hadn't seen him since the night he rejected her. But sometimes she could feel him, like heat bleeding through the walls, like pressure against her ribs, as if he stood just beyond the stone, breathing her name and hating that it tasted like something he wanted to swallow. He didn't return to her room, but she caught him watching her. Once. It was late. The garden was empty again, and she stood at the edge of the glass window overlooking the courtyard, tracing the fog her breath made. Movement. A shadow on the balcony above. She looked up. He didn't move, didn't hide. Cain stood in full view, arms folded, face in shadow. She couldn't see his eyes, but she knew he was watching. He didn't leave until she turned away. Days passed. Food came and went. No more guards inside her room. No more concubines sent to test her. The tension quieted, but didn't fade. Like breath held too long. Like frost waiting to snap. Era grew louder now, still not in control, not yet, but present. Sometimes Elia would wake with claws beneath her skin, aching to be freed. Her dreams were full of forests, blood, and heat. Her reflection no longer looked quite human. She didn't fear it, but she didn't trust it either. She sat in the corner of her room one night, candlelight flickering soft against the walls, and reached inward. Not for control, for conversation. "Why did you come now?" Era didn't answer right away. Then, "Because now you have teeth, and someone worth biting." Chapter 7. Blood on Snow. The wolves came with the wind. It started with a low, unfamiliar howl, echoing through the cliffs, longer than a call, sharper than a song. Elia heard it from her room, just after dusk. The sky was still streaked in red, though the blood moon had waned. Snow whispered against the window, but something beneath the wind changed. It felt colder, older. She stood by the glass, listening. The second howl came faster. Not one voice, but many. Not in unison, not pack, rogues. Her breath stilled. Era stirred immediately. "Not pack," the wolf whispered inside her. "Not yours, killers." Shouts rang out in the lower halls. Steel on stone, guards barking commands, boots running across the courtyard. A horn blared once, cutting across the wind, then fell silent. Then another sound. Closer, quieter. A low growl. It vibrated through the walls, like thunder restrained. She turned from the window, just as the lock on her chamber door snapped inward. Not turned, shattered. Cain stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing armor, just dark clothes, heavy boots, and a knife strapped to his thigh. His shirt was half open, blood on his chest. Not his. His breath came hard, fogging the air. "You," he said. "Shift, now." Elia didn't move, not from fear, from knowing. She stepped toward him slowly, the bond burning bright between them, hotter than it had ever been. "I said shift," he growled. Era surged forward, pushing beneath her skin like water breaking through ice. Elia dropped to her knees as the change began. Painful, raw, ancient. Her bones snapped first. Her hands hit the stone, then lengthened. Fur tore through skin in a flash of white. Her breath vanished. Her voice, never hers, was replaced with something older, deeper. She stood on 4 legs. Era was born into the world without a sound, not a howl, not a roar, just presence, white as bone, sleek as moonlight. Her paws didn't touch the floor. They claimed it. Cain stepped back, and from deep within him, another wolf answered. Not a growl, a force. Ravik. A wall of shadow burst from the alpha's chest, ripping through muscle and blood, the shift so fast it fractured the air. Ravik was massive, black-furred, eyes like molten steel, silver claws catching firelight. The moment he saw Era, his body went still. No movement, no sound. Then a low, resonant thrum echoed from his chest. "Mine." Elia didn't answer. She turned and ran. Not from him, toward the screams. Through the shattered hall, down the spiral stairs, past bodies, guards, servants, half-shifted wolves. Blood slicked the floor. The scent of fear was everywhere. The rogues were already inside. 3 of them surged through the corridor ahead, fangs bared, fur streaked with ash and blood. Era lunged without hesitation, her body moving on instinct. She hit the first rogue at the neck, tore through flesh, spun off the second. The third leapt, and was caught mid-air by Ravik's massive jaws. They moved together like a single thought. Back to back. Silent. Relentless. Fighting wasn't rage. It was ritual. Era wasn't Elia with claws. She was something colder, sharper. A wolf, born of silence and fury. She didn't cry out when bitten. She didn't hesitate when faced with larger wolves. Her fury didn't burn. It cut. And yet, through all of it, the bond tightened. Each time Ravik's body brushed against hers. Each time Kane's gaze locked with hers, mid-kill. Something else shifted. Not just skin. Not just scent. Claim. The moment came after the final rogue fell, his body twitching in the snow-covered courtyard. Era stood still, chest heaving, blood on her teeth. Ravik circled her slowly, not with caution, with intent. He stepped closer, pressed his snout to her throat, not rough, not forceful, but inevitable. And in that final second, Era didn't move. She didn't fight. She accepted. The bite was swift. Not savage, but final. His jaws closed around the place where neck met shoulder, deep enough to mark, not to wound. The mark burned instantly. The bond ignited like a firestorm. Elia's mind splintered, then fused. Her body stilled. Her soul snarled. And through it all, one thought pounded louder than breath or heartbeat. He marked me. Not because he loved her. Not because he wanted peace. Because he could no longer fight the pull. Because he had to. Because instinct demanded it. He marked her like a claim carved into ice. Ravik released her, backed away. And Kane stood there again, chest bare, blood splattered, watching her shift back onto trembling human legs in the red-stained snow. She didn't cover herself, didn't cower. She met his gaze across the distance between them, the mark glowing faintly on her shoulder. The cold didn't matter. The fear had passed. And for once, he didn't look angry. He looked ruined. He opened his mouth, said nothing, then turned and walked away. Chapter 8. The Marked and the Mute. Elia woke to warmth, not firelight. Him. Her bare shoulder pressed against something solid, and for a moment, the world was just skin and breath and heartbeat. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dimness of the chamber, the same East Wing room, but different now. The air carried his scent. The mark on her shoulder still pulsed faintly, aching but whole. The bed beneath her was rumpled. Furs kicked aside. Her limbs were heavy, stretched, healed. The battle had ended sometime during the night. She'd shifted back in the snow, bleeding and naked, and Kane had carried her here. She remembered none of it, only the sensation of being held too tightly, as if he thought she might vanish mid-step. He sat in the corner now, half in shadow, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on her. He didn't speak. He hadn't since the courtyard. The silence between them was no longer cold. It was weight, shared and unwanted. The bond was loud now, not screaming, but pulsing steady through her blood. A tether neither of them could cut. He hadn't apologized. Of course he hadn't. Kane Thorne didn't beg. He just watched her. Elia sat up slowly, wrapping a fur around her body, not out of modesty, but to give her hands something to do. Her gaze drifted down to her shoulder. The mark had set. The skin there was darker now. 2 crescent-shaped punctures, already healed, already permanent. It wasn't a scar. It was a brand, a declaration, a war flag, and he had planted it on her, without asking. Still, she didn't resent it, because what he'd done was what wolves did, and now it was her turn. He spoke finally, his voice raw from silence. "You hate me." She didn't flinch, she didn't nod. He stood slowly, like a man still measuring a battlefield. "I didn't want this," he said. "You know that." Her fingers curled against the fur. The bond burned through every word. "I fought it," he added, stepping closer. "But it's still there. I feel you in every breath, even when I try not to." He stopped a few feet from the bed, looking at her now not as a possession, not as a problem to be locked away, but as the one thing he could never undo. "You've changed everything." He said it like a confession, not a compliment, not regret, just fact. Elia stood, not quickly, not slowly. She crossed the space between them, the fur slipping from her shoulders, forgotten on the stone floor. The cold didn't bite. The bond kept her warm. The wolf within her, Era, watched with cool, quiet approval. She reached up with steady hands, not to touch his face, not to speak, but to bare her throat. The unmarked side, his mark was already on her. But his scent was still dominant. This was the part he hadn't expected. This was hers, her choice, her law, her silence. Kane's breath caught, just for a second. She leaned in, close enough to hear the hitch in his lungs, close enough to feel the heat rising off his skin. Then, without hesitation, she bit. Not deep, not cruel, but true. Her teeth broke the skin just below his collarbone, at the place where no armor could hide it. The mark of a second chance mate, not submissive, not claimed, equal. When she stepped back, he didn't touch the wound. He just looked at her. The blood welled slowly, a single drop sliding down his chest, and for once, he didn't try to stop it. His hands remained at his sides. You bit me." His voice cracked, soft with disbelief. Elia didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't speak. She turned away and walked to the window instead, watching as the first light of dawn bled across the snow-covered cliffs. Below, the garden still carried footprints and blood trails. The concubine wing remained sealed. The rogue wolves were dead or scattered, and the palace was no longer the same. The she-wolf they had bought in chains had died. The one who remained stood unbound. He moved behind her slowly, no longer a man guarding power, but a wolf who had been outmatched. He didn't touch her, not yet, just stood with her in the silence. The bond pulsed again, not painful this time, not sharp, just full. Elia closed her eyes. She didn't need words, and he finally stopped asking for them. Outside, snow began to fall again, light and lazy, a slow reclaiming of the world. The fortress sighed beneath the weight of new beginnings. Kane stepped forward. His hand touched her jaw, not to guide her, not to claim her, but to understand what she'd chosen. And when he leaned in, his mouth brushed her ear. "Speak, if you want me." Elia didn't speak. She bit his shoulder again,